My name is Emily, and this is the story of my parents' scandal. I can't believe they were involved in this. My heart is racing just by thinking about it. Before we start, please like and subscribe. My life has always been a whirlwind of change. My parents, both deeply entrenched in the real estate game, seem to thrive on the chaos. They buy up rundown houses, fix them up just enough to make them appealing, and then flip them to wealthy buyers for a hefty profit. This means I've never stayed in one place long enough to call it home, let alone make lasting friendships. But honestly, I didn't mind it as much as you might think. While other kids were building lifelong bonds in their neighborhoods, I found my own sense of stability in singing. It all started when I was just 5 years old, performing in a school play. I can still remember how it felt. The thrill of hitting the high notes, the way the audience's applause made my heart race. From that moment on, singing became my escape, my way of coping with the constant upheaval in my life.
Emily, pack your things. We're moving again.
Mom would call out every year or so. By then, I was already used to the routine. I'd gather up my sheet music, my videos, and my hopes, ready to start over in a new place. Singing was the one thing that remained constant, no matter where we ended up. As I got older, my dedication to singing only grew. I spent countless hours in front of the mirror, practicing scales, recording myself, and watching tutorials online, honing my voice until I could hit every note perfectly. By the time I turned 17, I knew this wasn't just a hobby. It was my future. But in my family, where every conversation revolved around the next big deal, I knew my dreams didn't stand much of a chance. One evening at dinner, I tried to bring it up. "Mom, Dad, I've been accepted into some really great music schools," I said, my heart pounding with hope.
That's nice, my dear.
Dad replied without looking up from his paperwork.
But we're really busy right now with this new deal. Maybe we can talk about it later.
Later. It was always later with them. I pushed my plate away, realizing that in their world, business would always come first. My passion for singing would never be more than an afterthought. So I kept my plans to myself, quietly dreaming of a future where I could finally break free from this endless cycle of moving and uncertainty, where I could put down roots, not in a new town, but on a stage where I truly belonged. As graduation loomed closer, I focused all my energy on one thing: getting into a professional music program. I applied to every top school I could find, pouring my heart into the applications. I knew this was my chance to turn my passion for singing into a career, and I was determined to make it happen. But as much as I wanted to share my excitement with my parents, I knew better. They were too wrapped up in their latest deal to even notice. For months, they had been obsessing over some big project involving a wealthy investor named Mr. Delaney. He was interested in one of their largest properties, and they were desperate to close the deal. So desperate, in fact, that they jumped at the chance when Mr. Delaney invited us to spend the summer at his luxurious seaside resort. They saw it as the perfect opportunity to finalize the sale. The resort was beautiful, but I quickly realized it wasn't going to be the relaxing getaway I had hoped for. From the moment we arrived, I felt like I was being watched, especially by Mr. Delaney's son, Ryan. He was everything I couldn't stand in a person: arrogant, entitled, and completely convinced that the world revolved around him.
Hey, Emily!
Ryan said, flashing a smirk as he blocked my path to the pool.
You know, I'm the best thing that's ever happened to this place. And to you, too.
I rolled my eyes, trying to sidestep him. "Please, Ryan, I'm not in the mood,"
Oh, come on. You know you can't resist me.
he persisted, leaning in closer. "Actually, I can," I shot back, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "And I do. Every single day." Despite my clear disinterest, Ryan's advances only grew more persistent. And to my horror, my parents seemed to be encouraging him. One afternoon, my mom pulled me aside, her expression serious.
Emily, we need to talk.
She began, and I could tell from her tone that it wasn't going to be good.
I got a call this morning from the New York Music Academy. They said you've been accepted into their program.
My heart leaped. "Really? That's amazing," I exclaimed, but her next words wiped the smile off my face.
Yes, but the tuition is expensive, and we don't have that kind of money right now.
She continued, her voice matter of fact.
Unless we get this deal with Mr. Delaney, and that's where you come in.
I stared at her, not quite understanding. "What do you mean?"
Mr. Delaney likes us, but he needs more assurance before he invests his money. If you get closer to Ryan, it might help seal the deal. Then we could afford your tuition.
Wait, you want me to date Ryan? For money? I couldn't believe what I was hearing.
Think of it as helping the family.
She replied, as if it were the most reasonable request in the world.
It's a small sacrifice for a big reward.
I was stunned. Not only were my parents dismissing my dreams of attending a prestigious music school, but they were also asking me to use myself as a pawn in their business dealings. The thought of sacrificing my future, my integrity, just to please them, and Ryan, was nauseating. But at the same time, I couldn't deny that the money from the deal could make my dreams a reality. That night, I lay in bed, torn between my ambition and the sickening feeling in my gut. It was a cruel dilemma, and I had no idea how I was going to choose. The next few days at the resort were anything but relaxing. Ryan seemed to be everywhere I turned, making it nearly impossible to enjoy even a moment of peace. Whether I was by the pool, trying to catch some sun, or just attempting to grab a bite to eat, he always managed to insert himself into my day. Ryan's arrogance was unbearable. He strutted around the resort like he owned the place, his confidence fueled by his father's wealth and influence. Every time he flashed that smug grin of his, I felt a pang of annoyance that I could barely contain. One afternoon, Ryan managed to convince me to go on a speedboat ride with him. Reluctantly, I agreed, hoping that maybe a day on the water would at least give me some temporary escape from the resort. But of course, things didn't go as planned. Ryan, in his typical careless manner, hadn't bothered to check the fuel gauge, and we ran out of gas halfway through the ride.
I can't believe this is happening. Why didn't you remind me to check the gas?
He snapped, his frustration boiling over. I just stared at him in disbelief. It's not my boat, Ryan. Maybe you should have checked it yourself. We eventually had to be rescued, and the ride back to shore was silent and awkward. I hoped this disaster would be enough to deter Ryan from pursuing me further, but of course I was wrong. The sun had barely set when we were finally brought back to shore, exhausted after the long afternoon on the boat. My mind was still spinning from everything that had happened with Ryan, but as we stumbled off the boat, I felt a strange mix of relief and anxiety. The events of the day had left me shaken, but I knew I had to pull myself together. As I looked around, trying to get my bearings, I noticed a group of people waiting for us on the dock. Rescue team members, a few curious onlookers, and him. He was standing slightly apart from the crowd, his tall frame relaxed, arms crossed casually over his chest. The first thing I noticed was his smile, wide and genuine, the kind that seemed to light up his entire face. His dark hair was tousled by the breeze, and when our eyes met, I felt a strange flutter in my chest.
Emily, right?
He said, his voice smooth and warm, like honey. He stepped forward, offering a hand to help me off the boat.
I'm Jacob. Glad you're safe.
I took his hand, feeling a jolt of something I couldn't quite name as our fingers touched. Yeah, that's me. Thanks. I guess we got a bit more adventure than we bargained for. Jacob chuckled, a deep, pleasant sound that sent another flutter through my chest.
Sounds like it. You handled it well, though. Not everyone can keep their cool in a situation like that.
I shrugged, trying to play it off, but I couldn't help the small smile that crept onto my face. Just doing what I had to. I didn't really have much of a choice. As we walked off the dock, I stole a glance at him, taking in his sharp jawline, the way his eyes seemed to sparkle with amusement. He was attractive. Okay, more than attractive. And there was something about the way he carried himself that made him impossible to ignore. So, Jacob, I said, trying to keep my voice light, what brings you out here so late in the day? Do you always greet shipwrecked damsels in distress? He laughed again, and this time it was my turn to feel a bit flustered.
Only the ones who seem worth rescuing.
He replied with a wink.
But really, I'm just helping out with the search and rescue team today. Thought I'd see if you needed anything. Coffee, breakfast, maybe some dry clothes.
I felt a warmth spread across my cheeks at his casual offer, and I tried to hide it by brushing a strand of wet hair behind my ear. Coffee sounds good, I said, hoping my voice didn't betray how flustered I felt. I think I could use about a gallon of it right now,
Then coffee it is.
Jacob said, his smile widening.
There's a great little place just down the road. How about I buy you a cup and you can tell me all about how you ended up on that boat in the first place?
I hesitated for just a moment, but something about his easygoing manner put me at ease. Besides, after the night I'd had, a cup of coffee with a charming guy like Jacob didn't sound too bad. All right, I agreed, returning his smile. But only if you promise to keep the rescue jokes to a minimum,
No promises,
he said, his eyes twinkling with mischief.
but I'll do my best.
As we walked away from the dock together, I couldn't help but feel a little lighter. The night had been rough, but maybe, just maybe, this unexpected meeting was the start of something good. The next day, Ryan dragged me out to the beach again. You should wear some sunscreen, I advised as he stretched out on the sand.
Huh, I don't need sunscreen. I'm a man.
He boasted, puffing out his chest. Within minutes, he was red as a tomato, and I couldn't help but laugh as he ran back to the resort, screaming about how much it burned. It was a small victory, but I took it. Later that afternoon, as I was heading back to my room, I spotted Jacob, the lifeguard, coming out of my parents' suite. My curiosity got the better of me. Jacob, what are you doing here? I asked, trying not to sound too accusatory. He looked startled for a moment, then fumbled for an explanation.
I was filling in for a plumber. There was a complaint about a leak, and our regular guy had to leave suddenly.
Right, I said, raising an eyebrow. And you decided to do it yourself?
Well, no. Actually, I wanted to see if you'd like to have lunch with me.
He admitted, looking slightly embarrassed. I couldn't help but smile at his awkwardness. You could have just asked. You know,
I know, I guess I got nervous.
he said, rubbing the back of his neck.
So, can we?
I nodded, still a bit confused but willing to see where this would go. Sure, why not? After that awkward encounter with Jacob, I couldn't stop thinking about him. There was something about the way he had seemed so out of place in my parents' suite, like he didn't belong there. But more than that, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was hiding something from me. The next day, I was determined to get some answers. After all, it wasn't every day that a lifeguard suddenly decided to moonlight as a plumber. When I found Jacob by the pool, I walked straight up to him. Jacob, we need to talk, I said, getting right to the point. He looked up at me, a mix of surprise and apprehension in his eyes.
Sure, Emily. What's on your mind?
What were you really doing in my parents' room yesterday? And don't tell me it was about a leaky pipe, I demanded, crossing my arms. Jacob sighed, running a hand through his hair.
I was going to tell you eventually. The truth is, I'm not just a lifeguard. I'm actually working undercover.
My eyebrows shot up in disbelief. Undercover? What are you talking about? Jacob leaned in closer, lowering his voice.
I'm with the CIA. I've been investigating Mr. Delaney for a while now. There's reason to believe he's involved in some illegal activities, and your parents might be caught up in it too.
I stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. So you've been spying on my family? Using me to get information?
Emily, it's not like that.
He said quickly, his expression earnest.
I really do care about you, but I couldn't tell you the truth until I was sure.
The revelation left me reeling. Part of me wanted to walk away, to pretend I hadn't heard any of it. But another part of me, the part that had always been skeptical of my parents' business dealings, couldn't help but wonder if Jacob was right. Why should I believe you? I asked, my voice shaking slightly.
Because I've seen the evidence.
He replied, his tone serious.
I'm close to finding out what Delaney is really up to, but I need your help.
I didn't know what to say. My parents might not have been the most honest people, but the thought of helping to take them down felt like a betrayal. Yet, if what Jacob was saying was true, then they were involved in something far more dangerous than I had ever imagined. Let me think about it, I finally said, turning to walk away. I need some time.
Take all the time you need,
Jacob called after me.
but please, be careful.
I didn't look back. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what to do. I had always known my parents were involved in shady deals, but this was something else entirely. After my conversation with Jacob, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. I tried to go about my day as if nothing had changed, but the seed of doubt had been planted. That evening, I decided I couldn't ignore it any longer. I needed to find out the truth for myself. When my parents went out for a dinner meeting with Mr. Delaney, I seized the opportunity to search their room. I felt a pang of guilt as I rifled through their belongings, but I pushed it aside. If they were innocent, then I had nothing to worry about. But if they weren't? In the back of the closet, hidden beneath a pile of clothes, I found a small safe. My heart pounded as I tried to guess the combination. After several failed attempts, I finally cracked it and the door swung open. Inside, there were documents, blueprints, contracts, and what looked like bank statements. As I skimmed through them, my blood ran cold. The documents detailed a secret project, something that involved offshore accounts and large sums of money. But the most damning piece of evidence was a letter from Mr. Delaney, outlining plans for what could only be described as a smuggling operation. I quickly took pictures of everything with my phone, my hands trembling. I had found the proof Jacob was looking for, but it came at a price. My parents were deeply involved in something illegal, something that could ruin them and me. Just as I was about to close the safe, I heard the door to the suite open. My heart skipped a beat. I barely had time to shove everything back into place before my parents walked in.
Emily, what are you doing in here?
My mom asked, her eyes narrowing with suspicion. I was just looking for my book, I lied, trying to keep my voice steady. I thought I left it in here. My dad raised an eyebrow.
We've told you before not to come in here without asking. This room is off limits.
Sorry, I mumbled, backing towards the door. I'll leave now. As soon as I was out of the room, I bolted down the hall, my mind racing. I needed to talk to Jacob to figure out what to do next. But as I reached the lobby, I saw something that made my heart stop. Jacob was talking to Mr. Delaney. I quickly ducked behind a column, watching them intently. Their conversation seemed casual, but there was something off about it. Why was Jacob talking to the man he was supposed to be investigating? And why did it look like they were friends? My mind was spinning. Had Jacob been lying to me this whole time? Was he in on whatever scheme my parents and Mr. Delaney were planning? I didn't know what to think anymore. Before I could make sense of it, Jacob caught sight of me. He looked surprised, but then his expression changed to something unreadable. He excused himself from Mr. Delaney and walked over to me.
Emily, what are you doing here?
He asked, his voice careful. I should be asking you the same thing, I replied, trying to keep the accusation out of my tone.
I can explain,
He said, glancing around nervously.
but not here. Let's go somewhere private.
I followed him, my heart heavy with doubt. Whatever explanation he had, I wasn't sure if I could trust it anymore. Next day, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I needed answers, but more importantly, I needed proof. If Jacob was right and my parents were involved in something illegal, then I had to find out what it was. And if he was lying, well, I needed to know that too. I waited until my parents left the suite again before I returned to the safe. This time I knew exactly where to look. I carefully extracted the documents, laying them out on the bed, and began to read through them more thoroughly. As I pored over the papers, a clearer picture began to form. My parents had been working with Mr. Delaney on a series of shady real estate deals, using offshore accounts to launder money. The smuggling operation Jacob had mentioned was real, and my parents were in it up to their necks. But there was something else, something that sent a chill down my spine. One of the documents detailed a plan to transport illegal goods through a property my parents owned. The location was remote, perfect for hiding something illegal, and the operation was set to begin in just a few days. My hands shook as I photographed the documents. This was the proof Jacob needed. But as I snapped the last picture, I heard footsteps outside the door. Panicking, I shoved everything back into the safe and locked it just as the door opened.
Emily, what are you doing in here?
My mom's voice startled me. I spun around, trying to hide my anxiety. I was just looking for my book. Her eyes narrowed.
Again? You know you're not supposed to be in here.
I'm sorry, I muttered, trying to make a quick exit.
Wait,
She said, stopping me in my tracks.
what were you really doing?
I told you I was just looking for my book, I repeated, a bit too quickly. She studied me for a moment, then shook her head.
Fine, just stay out of here from now on.
I nodded, practically running out of the room. I needed to find Jacob, and fast. When I finally found him by the pool, I didn't waste any time. Jacob, I found it. The proof you need. He looked at me, surprised.
You did? What did you find?
I quickly showed him the photos on my phone. As he scrolled through them, his expression grew darker.
This is it.
He said, his voice low.
His is exactly what we needed. Emily, you've done the right thing.
But I wasn't so sure. As I watched him, a nagging doubt tugged at my mind. Jacob, why were you talking to Mr. Delaney last night? His eyes flicked up to meet mine, and for a moment I saw something in them. Guilt, maybe?
I told you before. I'm working undercover. I had to keep up appearances.
I wanted to believe him, but something still didn't feel right. Are you sure you're telling me everything? He hesitated, and that hesitation was all the confirmation I needed.
Emily,
He began, but I cut him off. Just don't. I've done what you asked. Now, it's up to you. Without waiting for his response, I turned and walked away, my heart heavy with uncertainty. I had done what I thought was right, but now I wasn't so sure. The following evening, the tension in the air was palpable. I had been avoiding Jacob all day, unsure of what to believe anymore. But one thing was certain. I needed to confront my parents. After dinner, when we were alone in our suite, I took a deep breath and decided it was time to face the truth. Mom, Dad, we need to talk, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. They both looked at me, a bit surprised by my tone.
What's on your mind, Emily?
My dad asked. I didn't beat around the bush. I know about the smuggling operation. I know what you've been doing with Mr. Delaney. For a moment, there was complete silence. Then, my mom spoke, her voice unnervingly calm.
And where did you hear that?
It doesn't matter, I replied, my heart pounding. What matters is that it's illegal and you're going to get caught. My dad's expression darkened.
Emily, you don't understand. This is business. Sometimes you have to bend the rules to get ahead.
Bend the rules? You're breaking the law. I shot back, my anger rising. Do you realize what could happen if you get caught? You could go to jail.
Emily, calm down.
My mom said, trying to soothe me.
We're not going to get caught. We have everything under control.
Under control? I repeated, disbelief and frustration bubbling up inside me. I've seen the evidence. This isn't just a little bending of the rules. You're in deep, and it's only a matter of time before someone finds out. My dad sighed, running a hand over his face.
You don't understand the pressures we're under, Emily. We've worked our whole lives to build this business. We did it for you, to give you a better life.
And this is the life you want to give me? One where I have to lie and cheat to get ahead? I asked, my voice breaking. I don't want any part of this,
You don't have a choice.
my mom said quietly.
You're our daughter and you're part of this family. We protect each other.
Protect each other? By ruining our lives? You're not protecting me. You're dragging me down with you. For the first time, I saw fear in my parents' eyes. They knew I was right, but they were too far in to turn back now.
Emily,
My dad said, his voice softer now.
we can make this right. We just need more time. Once this deal is done, we can walk away from all of it.
But I shook my head, stepping back from them. I can't be a part of this. I won't. Without another word, I turned and left the suite, not knowing where I was going. All I knew was that I couldn't stay there any longer. The next morning, I knew what I had to do. I had made my decision, even though it felt like it was tearing me apart. My parents were in too deep, and the only way to save them and myself was to expose everything. I went to Jacob with the final pieces of evidence I had gathered. Here, this is everything you need to bring them down, I said, my voice hollow. Jacob looked at me with concern.
Are you sure about this, Emily? Once we go through with this, there's no turning back.
I nodded, though my heart was heavy with sadness. They made their choices. Now I'm making mine. Later that day, as the sun began to set, Jacob and his team moved in. I watched from a distance as they raided the resort, arresting Mr. Delaney and his associates. My parents tried to resist, but it was no use. They were caught, and there was no escaping the consequences. As my parents were led away in handcuffs, my mom turned to me, her eyes filled with tears.
Emily, we did it all for you. Please, you have to believe that.
But I couldn't find the words to respond. All I could do was watch as they were taken away, their empire crumbling around them. Jacob approached me, his expression solemn.
I'm sorry it had to end this way.
It's not your fault, I replied quietly. They made their choices. We stood in silence for a moment, watching the scene unfold. It was over. The lies, the deceit. It was all finally over. But the cost had been high, and as I walked away from the resort, I knew that nothing would ever be the same. With my parents in jail and the truth finally out, I had to start over. It wasn't easy, but I knew that I had made the right choice. I couldn't live a life built on lies. I decided to reapply to music schools, determined to follow my passion for singing. This time, I would do it on my own terms. Jacob stayed in touch, offering his support as I navigated my new life. We grew closer, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was finally free to be myself.
Emily, you're really talented. You know that, right?
Jacob said one day as we sat together at a cafe, reviewing my audition pieces. I smiled, feeling a warmth I hadn't felt in ages. Thank you, Jacob. I just hope I can make something of it.
You will.
He replied confidently.
You're strong, and you know what you want. That's more than a lot of people can say.
As the weeks turned into months, I found myself moving forward, slowly but surely. It wasn't easy, and there were days when the weight of everything had lost felt unbearable. But I kept going, knowing that this was the life I had chosen. An honest life. One that I could be proud of. When I finally received the acceptance letter from the New York Music Academy, I felt a wave of emotions crash over me. Relief, joy, and even a bit of sadness for the way things had turned out. But above all, I felt ready. Ready to embrace this new chapter of my life. As I stood on the stage of the New York Music Academy for my audition, I took a deep breath and let my voice soar. This was my new beginning, and I was ready to embrace it.